Good morning, everyone. Okay, just a slight mic problem. So good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning and welcome to our sixth Carbon Talks, where we'll unpack today the SBTi financial institution net zero standard that was just released in July of this year after a year-long public consultation. Maybe some of you gave some insights. We sure did at Carbonmetrics. To get a bit of context, we're now halfway through what the IPCC calls a decisive decade for climate action. Global temperature have recently exceeded 1.5 degrees for the first time, which highlights the urgency of aligning financial activities with net zero goals. As per SBTi, there are now nearly 11,000 companies that have set or committed to science-based targets, and the number of validated net zero targets has tripled since 2023, which reflects a broader trend. Climate action is no longer optional, and it's a core component of business strategy and risk management. So as I was saying, today we'll focus on what FINZ is the little nickname we will give to Financial Institution Net Zero Standard, the FINZ. What it means for financial institutions like yourselves, the scope of the targets, the target setting requirements, the policies, which are a bit new. If you're familiar with SBTi, mandatory policies are new. And our goal will be to provide you with clarity, actionable insights, whether you're already committed to near-term targets for SBTi or if you're looking to explore this framework. So without further ado, I'm joined here today by Valentin, which you might have already seen because we did a corporate net zero standard earlier this summer. I'm the head of marketing and is a senior climate consultant at Carbonmetrics. I just remind you, if you have questions during the webinar, you can ask them in the Q&A. It's at the bottom of your screen on the little question tab. And we will have, hopefully, and we will do our best to have the 15 minutes dedicated to answer the question at the end. And we commit to sending you a written Q&A after the webinar as a take-home. So for those who don't know us at Carbonmetrics, I've seen some client names in the registrants to the webinar, but we're Carbonmetrics. We guide private market professionals and their portfolio companies in effective decarbonization. And we have a hybrid service. We combine climate advisory services with Valentin, a good representative here, with a very intuitive platform. As of today, we've helped more than 120 financial institutions in the climate strategy that covers approximately 1.1 trillion euro AUM. And regarding the companies that we work with in their portfolios, they cover 150 industries, and they're more like 800. So maybe you've seen some names around there. Maybe some of you guys are on the webinar. So it's an honor to be presenting FINZ today with you. So let's dig in. This is what we will cover today in roughly half an hour before the questions. We'll give a brief recap of where is FINZ in the SBTi universe, then give you clues to understand what's the segments, that's kind of new elements of FINZ, and the scope for you to set targets. Then we will dig into the targets and the policies, and then give you a bit of insight and takeaways so you know where to stand. So looking at the FINZ, so basically you're probably familiar with the corporate net zero standard. It was covering scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 until the category 14 of the GHG protocol. And FINZ now is kind of putting together the whole picture. So it brings a net zero standard for the scope 3 category 15 that you know well, that are your investments. This is why it's important. It's major, and you're probably wondering what it is compared to the near-term target standard that was issued before. It's basically going to replace it altogether eventually, but as of now, the two still coexist. However, FINZ is setting new rules for near-term targets that needs to be set within 5 years, so you no longer have the choice. They have introduced also new financial activities in scope, like insurance underwriting and capital market activities. And the big news are the two last bullet points is the climate alignment targets that we will dig into this one later on, and the mandatory fossil fuel transition policy. So now moving to Valentin, I will give him the mic.
Thank you, Agathe. Hi, everyone. So First step to understand on what type of investment you as a financial institution will have to set targets. So the first step is to consider what type of financial activity you do. So FINZ recognizes 5 types of financial activities: lending, asset owner investing, asset manager investing, insurance underwriting, and capital markets activities. And basically, if you as a company generates more than 5% of revenue from any of those five financial activities, you will have to set targets on those financial activities. And in the following slides and presentation, we are going to focus mainly on the asset manager investing, but the philosophy is going to be the same for all the financial activities. It's basically only the investment routes or mandates that are going to change between the different activities, but otherwise the logic is the same. First, to understand on what type of investments you are going to set targets, SBTi now have now identified 4 big segments called A, B, C, and D. So the segment A regroups all activities linked to fossil fuels, so oil and gas and coal activities with a very, very broad range of activity, from extraction to production, distribution, and so on. Then you have what is called segment B, emission intensive sectors. So it regroups power generation, air transport, maritime and land transport, cement and steel production, as well as real estate and flag. So flag is forest, land, and agriculture activities. You have then sector C, which are basically all sectors that are not A and B. And then D is optional activity. It is similar to C, but basically these activities are optional depending on basically the investment route. And this is the logic here. It is that you will have to basically cross those segments with the different investment routes. So you may have, again, as a asset manager, direct investments or investments via funds and funds, for instance, and you will have to cross the segments with the routes to identify which type of investments are mandatory or optional. And this is what we are going to see in the next slides. So basically, if we apply this logic to an asset manager, so what you have to remind, and one thing you have to understand is that segment A, B, and C are mandatory, meaning that in most cases, you will have to set targets on investments that fall into those sectors. So fossil fuels, emission-intensive sectors, and basically the other sectors. And as an asset manager, what will be mandatory for those sectors will be all listed equity, so investment in listed corporates or SME from any sectors. Also corporate bonds for any sectors. You will have also private equity and venture capital, as well as private debt for any sectors as well. But if you are not fossil fuel, there are some conditions. Basically, you have to have more than 25% of the shares. Otherwise, as we'll see, it will be optional. And lastly, the project finance also in all sectors is also mandatory, except for the real estate. It only concerns the investments in new buildings. So these are the mandatory investment to be covered with targets. And then you have the segment D that regroups all the optional activities. So basically, again, for an asset manager, what will be optional through direct investments will be private equity and venture capital, where you have the minority of shares, so less than 25%, and project finance in real estate, but for existing buildings. And then The very rest of segment D will be all the investments made through funds and funds and advisory mandates. And this concern basically all the activities that were mandatory, but through these investment routes. And the idea is that basically through funds of funds or through advisory mandates, as an investor, you will have less less control over the companies. So putting targets for those companies is optional. And so, as we said, so category A, B, and C are mandatory. So the idea to set near-term targets is that you have to cover 100% of categories A, B, and C with targets. And when you look at categories A, B, C, and D, you have to cover at least 67% of your investments with targets. So we will see how it translates into an example in the following. And just for you to know, these coverage rules apply for the near-term targets, so the ones that are set for 5 years ahead. But for net zero targets that are also included in this new framework, basically 100% of the portfolio shall be covered by targets. So it means that all activities falling into A, B, C, and D. And now we are going to see with Agathe how does it translate with a concrete example.
So if we look at an example and we took Acme Capital, we voluntarily put a simplified example. We know your portfolios might be more complex. And remember, we are focusing on the asset manager. Oh, yeah, let's go. We're focusing on the asset manager financial activity. So Acme Capital, as of end of year 2025, they're investing in a company that produces steel, which is an emission-intensive sector, in solar panels project for 30% of their AUM, and in multiple companies in other sectors with majority ownership for 50% or half of their portfolio, and multiple SMEs, so small company in low emitting sectors, and they don't have majority shareholding, less than 25%, if we are more precise in this regard. So if we look at those different investments, we can identify the segments B, C, and D. So high emitting sector steel is a segment B. Solar panel is power generation. It's definitely segment B. With majority ownership fall into the direct investment with more than 25% of share or ownership. So it's segment C. That only leaves the last line in segment D, so optional. So you can see that if we compound the first two, the third first lines, we end up with 80% of the AUM, which is more than 67%, so 2/3 of the AUM. So in this case, this Acme Capital financial institution would not need to add the SMEs in the scope of the targets. They would only have to focus on the B and C segments. However, as Valentin mentioned, if they were to set a net zero target, then 100% of the portfolio would have to fit into this target, and so they would have to also include the segment D, which is important. However, if we tweak a bit the data, and for example, now the company that produces steel is only 10% of the AUM, solar panel as well, and it's still 30% of the companies with majority ownership. We can see that the segment D is highly represented for 50% of the AUM, and so now you would have, as Acme Capital, you'd have to choose amongst the asset that fits into this last line, which one of them you would include in the scope of your near-term targets. And in this case, it would be interesting to look at maturity and materiality of the companies in there. They're probably all low emitting companies in our example, but maybe some of them are already pretty mature regarding climate. And so that might be interesting. And we will see why when we look at the climate alignment target. Talking about the targets, moving to specifically the targets and the policies, we'll start with the most simple part of this, which are the policies. So it's a new elements of FINZ, which we strongly support, is adding to the commitment in addition to targets, you would have to commit to a policy. So publicly, and SBTi is helping you because there's a lot of wordings and a lot of documents that support those policy commitments. To commit to three policies. The first one is fossil fuel transition, and we will say this basically phasing out progressively, and this is mandatory. The other two, the no deforestation policy and the real estate policy, depends on exposure. The first one, deforestation, is mandatory by 2030 if you can show that you are significantly exposed. So basically, if you invest in flag assets, so forest, land, and agriculture, and if those, when you dig into those, you can show that you're exposed to deforestation, so you're switching like forest to agriculture, et cetera, then you would have to submit and commit to a no deforestation policy by 2030. And then the real estate policy that is recommended. So if you know a bit SBTi, they enforce some of their criteria and some are recommended. This is one of those, is recommended if significant exposure to real estate. As for the targets, the near term, as we mentioned, covers at least 67% of in-scope activities. There's a set for a maximum of 5 years ahead, and there are all the near-term target that you're gonna set. For example, if you have capital market activities and you have asset managing, investing, and you have maybe lending as well, you'd have to set the same. The near-term targets would have to be for the same target year for all of your financial activity in scope. And you will see there are some key milestones to meet in 2030, 2035, and 2040 to dictate the level of ambition that SBTi requires for you to meet those targets. And then the second target brought by FINZ is the net zero target, which requires for everybody to be at least 95% of all your investments to be at net zero state by 2050. So that's for an overview. And now if we dig into the policy, so mainly the fossil fuel policy, we will not get into detail on the two other ones. You could, if this concerns you, we could answer your question, but we focused on the fossil fuel policy. Basically, you have to commit to immediately cease financing a new coal expansion. Same thing for new oil and gas project expansion. And then to commit to the phasing out of your general purpose finance for oil and gas expansion immediately or no later than 2030. So they're kind of accelerating the phasing out on fossil fuels. And this is something interesting that SBTi is bringing here. They have differentiated with those segments the level and the speed at which the phasing out should be done and the net zero state should be achieved depending on the activities. Now digging into the targets. So as you probably know, SBTi works with the base year and a target year. The base year has to be chosen no earlier than 2020. So the most recent carbon footprint of your portfolio is the best you could choose, but it can be up until 2020. You would have to compute your gross portfolio absolute GHG emission. So they recognize the PCAF standard if you're familiar with it, for example. You will have also to compute the share of activities for which you have a GHG emission available, and this goes with data quality. SBTi now recognize the fact that you should look to improve the quality of your GHG inventory. This means that, for example, at the beginning, you might not have GHG report from all your assets, but over time, they're looking for you to actually improve those. And this is also something that you will have to disclose. Then something new, and this goes also with the policies, the clean energy to fossil fuel financial exposure, and the climate alignment of the portfolio. And we'll dig into this a bit later, but this is kind of the center of the FINZ standard. Then for the target year, we'll not repeat, it's no later than 5 years ahead. For example, for 2025, you'll have to set for 2030, and for the net zero target, it can be 2050 or earlier. Now I'll leave the mic to Valentin. No, I'm doing this one now. I'll keep this one. So to be more specific about the climate alignment of the portfolio and a bit of an introduction as well. So you're familiar with the portfolio emissions probably. And as you very well know, it's a backward-looking data. So you finish a year and then you look at the emission data of your assets and then you see they've decarbonized or they've not decarbonized. It has increased, it hasn't increased. Basically, it's lagging. What FINZ puts in motion is a leading indicator with the portfolio climate alignment, and this will drive the portfolio decarbonization. And this is what's interesting. So with this metric, you actually can play the role that's expected of a financial institution, is to drive their investments towards taking climate action.
Now, digging into how you will set your targets, and this is the core of the new standard. So basically, SBTi has drastically changed its approach, looking at how financial institutions should set targets. And basically, they have created something that is similar with other frameworks that you may be familiar with, which are NZIF or PMDR, for instance. So the idea is to classify the companies or projects you are invested in into different categories. And SBTi has defined 4 categories. The first one is the company is not aligned, so nothing specific is done regarding decarbonization and GHG mitigation in the company. And then you have 3 categories that are considered aligned, which are in transition. So a company or a project is in transition if it has a decarbonization pathway that can be having its own science-based targets, for instance, but not only. It can be also for sector emission-intensive sectors like steel production or power generation. It can be aligned with a specific benchmark associated with this sector. And SBTi is providing such benchmark with with the SDAs, the sectoral decarbonization approaches. But now we will see that SBTi is also recognizing other methodologies to have such benchmarks. So this is the first category, in transition. So meaning your company is in the right direction to net zero. Then you have net zero. So basically the company has reduced the emissions from around 90% and is basically compensating the remaining emissions. So currently, not a lot of companies should be net zero, but the goal is to have all investment to be net zero by 2050 at the latest. And in the center, you can see that there is a new category, which is the climate solution category, meaning that if you are investing in a climate solution, and climate solution means an activity that is recognized by a taxonomy, a local taxonomy like the EU taxonomy, this means that this investment is also climate aligned. And so it means that this company does not necessarily need to have a transition pathway or a decarbonization pathway. Its activity on its own is sufficient to be climate aligned. And the idea is that you will have to determine what is the percentage of coverage of climate aligned activities in your base year, and to identify what will be your milestones and the targets 5 years ahead. So briefly on this, I will not go into the details, but you have different target ambition depending on the segments that we have defined before. So A, B, C, and D. Basically, for segment A, you will have to phase out from all investment related to coal, and this goes from coal mining to coal power plant, basically. And for oil and gas, you will have to align with a specific benchmark, meaning that you will have to divest or to invest into abated fossil fuel power generation assets, for instance. So assets that are associated with carbon capture and storage, as an example. And the idea is that by 2050, you are no longer invested in any activities related to fossil fuel, because, as you may know, the goal is to get rid of fossil fuel if we want to reach our climate global goals. And regarding categories B and C, you will have to progressively increase the percentage of companies that are climate aligned, so being in transition, climate solutions, or net zero. And the idea is that by 2040, 95% of categories B and C should be climate aligned. And then the philosophy is a bit similar with category D. So if we go back to our example of Acme Capital, so we have so it is invested in a steel producing company, solar panel projects, and a company with a majority ownership. So as we said, the last 10% of investment in the SMEs is optional. So we are not going to set targets for the moment on those companies. And then regarding the different companies, you can choose different targets. So as we said, the steel producing company is an emissive sector. So you can check if the company is aligned with the sectoral benchmark. So let's say that the company produces steel with a carbon footprint that is 2 tons of CO2 per tons of steel produced in 2025. This is not aligned with the sectoral benchmark because this steel is not low carbon enough. The solar panel projects, they are climate solutions. They are aligned with the European taxonomy. So this, that this part of the AUM is climate aligned. And then the companies Acme Capital is invested in have no sectoral pathway. They have no decarbonization trajectories yet. So they are not aligned. So as a result, only the solar panel projects are climate aligned in the baseline. So this means that you have 33% of your AUM in the base year that is climate aligned. And the idea is that you will have to increase over time the share of investments that are climate aligned. And so how do you set your targets? How do you determine what is the percentage to reach? So as we said previously, for categories B and C, you have to have 95% of these categories to be climate aligned by 2040. So what you do is that you just basically draw the linear pathway between where you are in the base year and 2040, 95%. And then you look at where this linear pathway brings you in 2030, which is the next near-term target, because it's in 5 years from now. And basically, if you put the calculations, you will see that it leads you to 53.6% of your AUM to be climate aligned by 2030. So it means that either you will have to implement decarbonization plan in your steel producing company, or you will have to implement decarbonization pathways in the other companies you are invested in to increase the share of climate aligned AUM. And this is basically what I just said. So if you want the company to be climate aligned with the steel producing company, you have to refer to the sectoral benchmark. So you have to reach the figures that are written here. So 1.6 tons of CO2 per tons in 2030, 1.2 in 2035. And so if you reach those numbers, the steel producing company will be climate aligned. And so this will increase your share of climate aligned AUM. And for the other sectors, as I mentioned, they will have to have decarbonization pathways that are aligned with the Paris Agreement. And this can be having targets validated by the SBTi, for instance. And as I said, it can be having targets validated by the SBTi, but now SBTi recognizes more frameworks and methodologies to check if an asset or a company is aligned with the Paris Agreement, and you have a list that exists for the moment. So you have, I would say, something like 10 different methodologies at the moment. You have temperature scoring methodologies. You have the Transition Pathway Initiative. You have the ACT sectoral methodologies as well, and of course the SBTi corporate standards. And the idea is that for the moment you have those methodologies that you can use to assess if your investees are in transition. And the SBTi is going to assess existing and future methodologies, and probably this list is going to be expanded in the coming years.
So moving to our last elements before we move to the questions, and I can see that you have many. So a bit of a wrap up for the net zero. I mean, to give you a kind of an overview of the net zero journey when it comes to financial institution net zero standard. So you have those 5 steps. So first, commitment, as always, that will then come to the assessment by the SBTi, and you will have to disclose all the elements. So the GHG emissions of your portfolio, a bit of data quality there, and also all the ratios we mentioned of our fossil fuels to clean energy ratios, and the climate alignment of your portfolio at the base year. Then you will move to the target setting, and then the reporting part is the most important one. So annually, you will have now to report on your portfolio emissions, the climate alignment of your portfolio, and report your progress. So if we stop for a minute on this means that you will have to adapt your processes, investment strategy to make sure that you keep the alignment in check with the trajectory, since there's a check every 5 years. You need to have this in mind, that every 5 years with any new investment, this could derail the percentage. We will dig into there are some mentions for some investments. We've not gone into details there, but there are for some type of investment where you have 2 years after investment to actually report them in your portfolio climate alignments. And then every 5 years you will have to renew the target and keep up the good work, I guess. Our key takeaways, I think we at Carbonmetrics, we all agree that this is a significant step for SBTi. This was the missing stone in the wall they're building now. The climate alignment target combined with the portfolio emission tracking seems to be the right way to move forward and leverage the financial institution with the role that they have as climate transition drivers. The segments that we mentioned, the A, B, and C, also bring materiality at the core of the framework, and it means that they are acting as accelerators for fossil fuel phase out. They also put the spotlight on the most emissive sectors, and also the fact that they take into account the leverage that you have on those investments is something new. The investment in climate solution as part of the climate aligned category is also something that's relevant to pin out, because we had many questions on the fact that you cannot decarbonize a solar farm, a solar panel farm, or a wind farm. In this case, there's the climate solution connected with the taxonomy. So SBTi is finally including those investments in the portfolio climate alignment reporting. And of course, this is what I said before, but we all know that the IUM and the composition of your portfolios vary with the exit, the entries. This climate alignment will need to be embedded in the due diligence process to make sure that you will not derail your trajectory if you are committed to a near-term or net zero target. So all in all, a good step. Once we've said all of this, before you actually think of committing, it might be interesting to have a first idea of what's the ABC segmentation of your portfolio, as well as the current climate alignment. And this could be a good place to start to see what would be the effort and what would lie like the next steps. So now we will move to the questions. And I've answered one from Lorraine, wanted some precision on the oil and gas expansion, and mainly it's upstream. SBTi mentioned upstream expansion. The applicable rules for existing buildings that will be renovated, I guess it falls into the existing buildings and not the construction. And correct me if I'm wrong, Valentin.
Mhm.
So I will type the answer. You can take the next one.
Okay. So we have a question from Jocelyn. Could you give an example of lead climate alignment indicator of the portfolio? So I think this was answered during the presentation, but basically, to be climate aligned, as we said, an asset should be either in transition, so meaning it has a decarbonization pathway, or a climate solution, so it is aligned with an existing taxonomy, or it is net zero, so basically this asset has achieved the full decarbonization according to its sector's specificities. So let us know, Jocelyn, if it answers your questions, and if not, don't hesitate to reach out to us by email. Now we have a question from Audrey. So when a company is classified as in transition, does their science-based net zero pathway have to be SBTi certified? So also this was mentioned, but maybe you asked before. But this is a great change of the SBTi methodologies, that before they were recognizing only themselves, let's say, and now more methodologies are available to assess if an asset is in transition or not, and they recognizes both cross-sector methodology like the temperature score rating, for instance, and also sectoral methodologies. You have a few ones for steel also that are now recognized by the SBTi. And as I mentioned, the list of recognized methodologies is going to be updated and expanded in the coming years. Then we have also another question from Audrey. If I understand correctly, the near-term targets focus on increasing the share of climate-aligned companies rather than increasing the share of companies in transition. So basically, it's both. So being climate-aligned means being in transition, climate solution, or net zero. So you have to increase the share of climate-aligned. Then to reach your targets, you are free to increase the amount of in transition or the amount of climate solution, or the share of net zero. This doesn't matter. The idea is just that the global share of climate aligned assets and investments increases with time to reach 95% by 2040 in the case of categories B and C, as we mentioned earlier. We have a question from Ladislas. I understand that the SBTi requires company to reduce emissions in absolute terms rather than on an intensity basis. Could you please correct if this is correct? Basically, for the investees, if you want to use the SBTi frameworks, you will have to use the corporate standards. And for companies, the standard says that you have to use absolute targets for scope 1 and 2, and absolute or intensity targets for scope 3, and this is true for corporates. And for SME, there is a specific methodology that only requires company to set targets over scope 1 and 2 only. Scope 3 is optional for SMEs, but scope 1 and 2 targets have to be set in absolute terms. And questions from Margot. Do you need to do GHG emissions baseline and reporting even if your investments are climate aligned? For instance, if your target's 95% EU taxonomy aligned investment by 2040, in theory, you should do it. The idea is that SBTi is already recognizing, let's say, a simple way of assessing emissions, especially emissions from climate aligned investment, and this is especially true for renewable energy. For instance, we had the case, we recently had a company that is investing 90% of its AUM into renewable energy, and the financed emissions, they were calculated based on a simplified methodology. Basically, they were just listing the type of renewable asset and associating emission factors with it, and then computing the emissions like that. And this was recognized as sufficient by SBTi at the time, and this was before the new framework is on. And I guess this philosophy is going to be the same, especially for, as you mentioned, climate solutions. You don't need to have a decarbonization pathway, so having your GHG emissions regularly computed is not that relevant, let's say.
So I think there was one question from Jocelyn. If I come back to the slide where we show the financial activities, so basically the first thing you have to do is look at your revenue and look at from those 5 activities, and there are some details that are available in the standard to precisely identify one from the other. But basically, if you identify that one of those 5 financial activities accounts for more than 5% of your revenue generated, then it has to be in scope. Once you've said this, then you will open the one, like if you look at an asset manager investing represent more than 5% of your generated revenue, you will then open this and look at what are your assets in this line of investment, and you will see then the rest of what we showed. So what are segment A, B, C, what is optional, what is mandatory, and how what is the climate alignment of those. And then you will take the next financial activity. So if you also have insurance underwriting, then you will also open the insurance underwriting box and look at the A, B, C split in the assets there, and then move forward like this. I don't know. I hope this answers your question. So I think we're done. I will just publish a quick poll for us. It helps us understand if we've done a good job or not. So thank you for answering. As mentioned, if you are already a client of ours and you're thinking about committing to SBTi and you still have questions on FINZ, we're here. Otherwise, we will share the replay of this webinar. We will also compute the Q&A, the written Q&A, so you have the answers that we've given in writing. And we're looking forward to have more discussion with you on this standard, and see you in our next webinar. There's one coming up at the end of the month about avoided emissions. We will welcome Jocelyn, and we will also welcome climate dividends. So if you're interested in computing avoided emissions on your portfolio, this might be interesting to add in your calendar. Thank you very much for participating, and wish you bon appétit. Have a good day.
Bye.